I've spent over a year developing an open world game called Mana Valley, and parts of it use something called visual scripting, which is just like programming with Legos. Unreal uses it in their blueprint system, Scratch uses it, and Unity also has it too. I just don't think anybody knows about it. In this particular case, the visual scripting is a part of an asset that I'm using. But on October 31st, they announced an update that would turn my visual scripts from this to this, absolutely breaking everything in my game. The obvious way to avoid this problem would have been to not update, but that would be like resigning to use an iPhone 4 when all of your friends are using an iPhone 5. Wait, they're up to iPhone what now? Hold on. Sorry about that. As I was saying, I've got to have the latest and greatest stuff to show, even if it comes at a detriment to me and everyone around me.
Ew.
I'm sure you can imagine that redoing a year and a half of work is a big undertaking. And getting this news just a few weeks after Unity attempt to use self-destruct also didn't help with morale. There's certainly more than one game dev who's made a video about canceling the game they've spent months or even years developing. My game Mana Valley could just be another casualty in the game dev junkyard. The bad news for me is that I'm either too dumb or too stubborn to let that happen. As long as there is breath in my lungs, I will work towards releasing this game. I will finish, and I won't become another statistic. I will rise from the ashes, spread my wings, and soar through the skies. And besides, Mrs. Aya told me that I'm not allowed to cancel the game. So there's that. In reality, any challenge is also an opportunity. There are things I've been meaning to fix and have just been quietly ignoring. I mean, after all, making a levitation spell is just way more fun and exciting than supporting controller and making a settings menu. But maybe it's time to address stuff like that. In a previous video, I mentioned I had issues debugging visual scripts. I've been using visual scripting, and the complexity of using that to make AI made it really difficult to troubleshoot. To be clear, I think they're fine for prototyping or small games, but the more complexity you add, the harder it gets to remember how everything is connected. When something does go wrong, it kind of feels like building something giant with Legos. And at some point you realize you misplaced a block and everything is thrown off. And then you have to sort through something like this to find it. In my last devlog, I talked about how I converted my damage and AI to actual scripts. This is because the visual scripting requires game objects, and I simply don't trust prefabs after the incident. So I decided I'm going to start removing the visual part of my visual scripts. So far, that's worked out really well. In this whole everything is on fire moment, it's been one of the things that has actually made it through. So I'm just going to continue down that path with everything. And thankfully, the core asset I'm using, Game Creator, is set up in a way that makes it pretty simple to tie into through code as well. Now it's time to come clean about something to you guys. If it isn't already obvious, making YouTube videos while making a game creates a really weird development cycle. Oftentimes, instead of focusing on things that need to be done, I end up prioritizing things that I think make interesting videos. The result of doing this for over a year has been a mess of a project. So since we're fixing things, let's clean some of that stuff up too. Here's some gloves and a broom. Oh, you're not here to help? Well, if that's the case, then the least you could do is hit the subscribe button. Thank you. First, I'll start with the biggest thing, the save system. I'm super ashamed to admit that the game saves in 3 ways right now. Game Creator 2 has its own save system that works fine for 90% of games, but won't save objects created by the player. I've been thinking about workarounds to that for a long time, but eventually decided to use another asset called Easy Save 3. As a temporary solution, up until this point, I've been using both. ES3 for anything the player builds, and GC2 for everything else. But I'd like to have everything just handled by one, and I think ES3 can do that. I would like to point out that Marty, the developer of Game Creator, referred to ES3's method of saving as playing with fire. So if that's the case, I guess you can start calling me Charizard. Marty is 1,000 times smarter than me, but I'm sure this decision won't come back to haunt me. I was also using Unity's built-in system called Player Prefs for character customization. I just never intended for it to be a long-term solution. But almost a year after implementing that, here we are. The biggest challenge is saving Game Creator things in a different system. The execution order is just so specific. But with a lot of pain, pity, and help from people way smarter than me, I got it working. I had to change all of the functionality for my save slots, and then it was time to rework character customization. In reality, it would have been easy to just swap out a few functions, but I also wanted to simplify how I had things set up. Before, I manually assigned a function to each button, and each cosmetic had a different material for each color option. It was just a lot of stuff to manage. There's a cool trick for customization like this where you can use a black and white texture and use the color property of the material to change its color. The artist in me originally fought against this because highlights and shadows look better if they're not just shades of color, but since I'm solo developing all of this, maybe that's okay. By giving up a bit of artistic control, I'm able to have just one material and texture per hairstyle, which massively simplifies everything. I also made it so that all buttons in the customization menu are created automatically. That means I can now focus on creating the actual cosmetics instead of worrying about creating buttons and various colors. If you're interested in how I set that up technically, I go over it in detail along with other things in my latest Patreon post. And the game finally have credits that show supporters at qualifying tiers. A huge thank you to you guys for keeping this project going. I'm able to pour a lot of my time into this project, but there are still lots of other costs associated with making a game. Those of you who are able and continue to support, I can't say this enough, thank you. When I started this project, I didn't think it was going to be open world. I thought everything would be contained in scenes, and then I added flying, and that all changed. But I still had these lingering ideas of self-contained scenes, like the starting area and a place to build. The starting area made sense story-wise and for a future demo. The player's home was more of a decision to keep the building limited to a single area. But when developing, having different scenes made it annoying to make changes. I was using prefabs, but oftentimes, for whatever reason, things just didn't transfer between scenes nicely. So I decided, let's just have one main scene that holds all of the core things that control the game and load parts of the world in as we need them. I'm already doing that with terrain streaming, so it was really just more of a switch for me mentally. I moved the starting area to a position far from the rest of the world so it wouldn't interfere with anything. But when I spawned in this area and used the spellbook, it started to glitch out. It actually looks kind of cool, but it's not really my intent. For a good hour, I tried to figure out why the wind was affecting the pages until a random forum post made me realize that it was a floating point error. I've never worked on a project this big, so I've never run into this before. Just simply being so far from the world origin was making the animations act weird. So I moved everything back to the origin, and I'll just need to manage how the player goes to and from this area a little differently. I also realized, if you've been following the devlogs, that I just kind of sprung the spellbook onto you just now. Yeah, I added a spellbook. I thought it would be cool if it served as the core for managing your inventory and the other menus. It uses a world space canvas, so the book is actually physically in the world. I think that's pretty cool, but it does present some potential problems with resolution that I'll have to tackle later. When I originally made the spellbook, I had it always follow the player around, but it was distracting to have up all the time. I had it as an Easter egg in the thumbnail of the last video, but I think it could be cool when you switch spells, the book opened up flipped pages, and showed the new spell icon before disappearing. It could also be cool if the book was some sort of companion you could level up. Seeing it in action reminded me of a game I played as a kid called Jet Force Gemini. I forget how it worked exactly. I think there was an actual local co-op split screen mode, but if you were already playing and someone picked up the controller and pressed enter, they could shoot lasers from your flying robot. As a kid, I thought it was a really cool way to include friends and cousins who were, let's be honest, trash at gaming. You could play with them without ruining your own gaming experience. But it does feel like a bit of a side quest for me right now, so if you think it would be cool, let me know in the comments, and I'll think more about implementing it. About a year ago, I showed this intro cutscene, and a lot of you really liked it. But when I was doing it, I unfortunately wasn't really thinking about cutscenes as a whole. So everything that's needed to run this cutscene just kind of hangs out. I also had to change camera systems in order to run this cutscene as well. Unity's new spline features are really powerful, and there's a dolly integration with Cinemachine. So my thought was maybe I could simplify here by changing the camera system to Cinemachine and developing a cutscene system that uses timeline. That way I'm not enabling or disabling whole systems, just individual cameras. I also hope that this would fix a lingering bug where the camera aims directly down when you aim from a low camera angle. And thankfully it did. I spent a few days converting my cutscene to Cinemachine and timeline, and made a cutscene manager that can be easily tied into. There's still some spots in this particular cutscene that need love, but I'm trying to stop my habit of endlessly tinkering with everything on my first pass. And the way I set everything up with the manager made it really easy to add a skip button. There's a bit to iron out with the player cameras still. Zooming in and out doesn't feel very smooth, and transitioning out of the aim view isn't fluid, but at least it's working functionally. I ended up having to create my own collision detection system for the third-person camera view, which was eye-opening to say the least. For the first few hours, I was trying to detect collisions by casting rays from the camera to the player, when it made much more sense to detect a collision from the player to the camera. Right now, that's implemented as the solution for how players will navigate indoors, but I may end up just forcing a first-person view with more testing. One cool thing to come out of this is that I made sure to maintain the center of view when switching between third person and ADS views. This is actually something that is pretty easy to take for granted in games. If you're aiming at something in third person view, you'll still be aiming at that thing when you ADS. This made a pretty simple transition to creating a lock-on system, which is something I've been wanting to add for a while because it's really the only practical way to make a game like this playable on controller. Right now it snaps to targets, but I'd like to explore what it would feel like as more of an aim assist than a hard lock. It's been a long time since I've played it, but I'm pretty sure this is how Ocarina of Time and the newer Zeldas work. There's a lot more cool stuff that I want to talk about, but I'm trying to get ahead of these videos in my development cycle. So while some fan art and competition entries show in the background, I'd like to just express how I know a lot of this work isn't flashy or glamorous. The benefit is really a more solid foundation, and having checked a bunch of things off the list I was avoiding, I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I'm so close to connecting some of the core systems into a coherent experience that it gets me so excited just thinking about it. This next year of development should be really exciting, so make sure to subscribe to follow the progress of the game. Until then, if you're interested in seeing what my first year of progress looks like, you can watch this video.